Good morning, everyone. As favorite teacher. I modified that question to share a few favorite aspects of different teachers and grades that I liked, so don't feel like you have to choose one. But we'll talk for about 5 minutes and let folks come in, and then we will get started. Good morning again. Aren't we grateful for our teachers? Yes, they leave lasting impacts on our lives. A note about next week, before we get to this week. Next week we'll be hearing from Margie Janelle. Margie, will you raise your hand? If you don't know Margie, I think we all do, but she's right there. She's going to be speaking on Where Do I Belong? Influenced by My Four Worlds. So we look forward to hearing from Margie. Following that, we will be hearing from Del Walker, who I think will be healthy and strong enough to be here. He just had neck surgery, but he assured me in the hospital that he would be ready to go. And then we'll have the fourth week in August, a report from our youth on their experiences at camp. And then Labor Day weekend, we'll wrap up the series hearing from one of our oldest members, Ray Schramm, who is in his 90s, and you'll often see him standing by the kiosk. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Geraldine Saunders-Cooks. Geraldine was born and brought up in a city where everything was historic. She grew up in a church that is a descendant of the African Meeting House from the historic Beacon Hill in Boston, Massachusetts. She lived in a neighborhood where Paul Revere's partner, William Dawes, made a stop at the Unitarian Church down the street. I'm smiling because I know where that church is. And several of the jobs that she held over the years were church-based, even though they weren't Baptist. She's traveled a bit, and her travel bug was inspired by her mother, who encouraged her to see the world. And I think Geraldine is going to be sharing with us a number of different things about her life. So please join me in welcoming Geraldine.
I was going to try and get out of this by telling Ann I was FBI, CIA, or something. This is hard. Even though you're a teacher, you just grip the desktop and go for it, I guess, and that's what I'm going to do. Well, I was born in Boston. My parents were not from Boston. I'm not sure how my mother got there, but I know my dad came because my aunt had moved from Canada down. My mother came from Kansas, so how they got there, I don't know. My dad was a storyteller. He told crazy stories, but one of the stories that happened to be true was one about the harbor in Halifax blowing up, and you could hear it all over the place when he was a kid. Well, I didn't know at that time how wide the age gap was between my parents. Now, the harbor blew up during World War I. My mother was definitely not born during that time. So that was one of his stories that actually happened to be true. The other thing is, because at that time, Canada was really under the British Empire kind of thing, he taught us, we learned My Country 'Tis of Thee in school. He taught us God Save the Queen, which my mother would just shake her head and go on. What was something else he did that was kind of fun? Oh, instead of saying lieutenant, he would say lieutenant, or Z for the end of the alphabet. So we had kind of a fun upbringing. My mother grew up in Leavenworth, Kansas. I guess my grandfather worked at the fort or the prison. I'm not sure what he did there. And then somehow they came to Boston. My mother was what you would call, what do they call the ladies that worked during World War II? Oh, I can't think of it. Rosies. Yes, she was a Rosie Riveter. She worked on the ships. She was a pipe fitter. One of my best friend's mother worked in a munitions plant on Quincy Street. So anyway, they met. I found a letter from my parents. My father had written to my mother during World War II, "Don't wait for me," kind of thing. It just kind of brought tears to my eyes. But they did get married, and then here I am, right after the World War II, right after the Korean incident or whatever they were calling it. So the first house I lived in was on Chalmette Ave, and I was my memories were when I was about 2 years old. And the memory I have is a black sink for the kitchen sink, and my mom would take me and stand me on a little stool and we would wash dishes. The next memory I have of Shaman Ave was going into my aunt's kitchen and down the stairs, and she had a red and white tablecloth. My mother still could not understand how I remembered all that, but I did. Then we moved up to Guild Street. As I said, there's a lot of history in Boston. Let me go back to Shaman Ave. One of our neighbors, and you'll recognize the name, I'll give you his birth name, was Louis Walcott. You guys probably know him as Louis Farrakhan. I didn't know that at the time, but every family has a historian. And my aunt would tell these, somebody would say something, I call up my aunt, is this true? And she said, yeah, he lived down the street. There's something, I think Martin Luther King lived on Shaman Ave, but again, I'm not sure. So you have that kind of history. When we moved up to Guild Street, I was about 2, and I remember the move because all our furniture was on the back porch and in the backyard before we moved it into the house. And I remember there was a tree stump by the basement door, and there was a snake on it. You cannot forget that stuff, I'm sorry. So anyway, my father killed it, and life goes on. The house we had, the backyard had a grapevine, 3 peach trees, and a cherry tree. And my mother would can, so we'd get peaches off the tree, and then, the kitchen would be buzzing with pots, and it was hot in there, I'll tell you. And she would can the peaches for the rest of the year. So that's kind of my remembrance of Guild Street. The other thing is, I know that my mother worked for the doctor for whom the street was named. And there's another famous person in this room. My brother lives on her family street. I don't know, Boston is just full of history. Now, when I gave Anne the mini biography, William Dawes was a real person. He was Paul Revere's partner, and he did stop at the Unitarian Church. We heard about it all the time. Across the street was one of my favorite places, Norfolk House. We didn't have rec centers like we have today. Norfolk House was what they call the settlement house. So upstairs, there were a lot of instructors lived there, and downstairs there was a gym. There were classrooms. We had art. We had, if you wanted Girl Scouts, you had Girl Scouts. Just a lot of fun. The schools I went to, Nathan Hale was my school. It was a nice little school. I just loved that place. It went from kindergarten to 5th grade. Now, when you got to 4th grade, the boys went to the Dudley, the girls stayed there. So from the time I was in 4th grade to the time I graduated high school, I was in all-girls schools. So when I say that, people say, oh, you went to private school. No. This was Boston's way. And I don't know, Walter, I don't know if your side of town did that or not. Edith, I don't know. Did they do that in Roslindale and Roxbury? Okay, so I'm not an oddball. No, it's just one of those odd things. So let me tell you about our school. 1st grade, my mother was pregnant with my youngest brother. He's still living. My middle brother has passed away. And I can remember my mother laying on the sofa and asking me, did I know Aunt Fanny's phone number? Well, in those days, the phone numbers had an exchange. Her exchange was Garrison. So her number was Garrison 78518. It's up here. So she asked me to dial my aunt's phone number. Now I'm 6 years old. And she said, do you know how to do it? And she talked me through it. So my mother talked me through it. My aunt came and picked her up, and lo and behold, here's my little brother. He stayed a while at the hospital, and I was just telling Anne, one of the things I remember, my mother would park my brother Richard and I on this bench in the Dowling building and tell us not to move while she went upstairs. Those benches are still there. When I went to the hospital for my youngest brother, I couldn't believe it. I walked into that building and the benches I remember it just like yesterday. So, that's why I say Boston's old, but the history's there. Now, when I was in elementary school, third grade stands out for two reasons. We learned the 23rd Psalm. They can't do that anymore. We said it every day, or Mrs. Leonard would read from the Bible. This is public school. Now, this is a representation. It's not, I tried to find an inkwell and some ink, I couldn't. But we didn't have ballpoint pens. We didn't get ballpoint pens until 6th grade. So you dipped it in, you wrote your name, you did whatever you had to do. And on Fridays, we cleaned the inkwells. So it's like a step back in time. When I told the kids this when I was teaching, they just, no, it's not for real. Yes, it was for real. The other thing we did, in 4th grade, we had sewing. The teacher would divide the class in half. One half would be working on something and the other half would be sewing. I remember my 4th grade apron. And then toward the end of the year, we got to sew on a sewing machine. But it was a treadle machine. It was not, you sit there and you pump the thing. So this is it's a music box. And it's going to a friend of mine. She does dollhouses. So she'll put that, I hope, in her dollhouse. So that's, my elementary school. I just loved it. I just thought it was wonderful. Now, when we got to 6th grade, we had to go down the street to another school. Again, all girls, we had sewing. But this time, our sewing machine had a regular, electric thing. So that's kind of how I grew up in Boston. Nathan Hale was one of our patriots. He was the one that said, I regret I have but one life to give for my country. And reading some of the biography and history about him, he was a spy for George Washington. And he was caught and, of course, hanged. The one thing about our neighborhood, we had a couple of old mansions in the neighborhood. And across the street from where I lived, up the street, and I have to tell you, Boston's blocks are short. It's not like Denver, where it's kind of a 1/10 of a mile or whatever. Well, up the street was an old library called the Fellows Athenaeum. And we used to do a scavenger hunt every now and then, maybe once a year. And one of the things that was still there was these rings. We never knew what the rings were. Well, they used to tie their horses up. And they were still there. Now this, I could not find a real horseshoe in the city of Denver. When I came to Denver, there were little ranches, right there in Aurora, and most of them are gone, and there's big, tall houses. If I tell you this, you probably won't believe it. We used to have a rag man that would come around with his horse and carriage and go rags, you bring out your cotton material and you take it. We had an iceman that did the same thing, and with horses, not with trucks. We had a vegetable man that did the same thing. They came through the streets and asked if you wanted to buy fruits and vegetables. My street had brick sidewalks for a long, long time. The other thing, when they dug up our street for some repair work, it was all cobblestone. So I think Boston's a little more modern. The streets are still very narrow. You can't park on both sides of a lot of the streets in the neighborhoods. So when I came out here, it was like, wow. Just all this wide open space. So that's my view of how I grew up. Some of the things that we did, when I went to the Dillaway School for 6th grade, we had an opportunity to go to religious ed. So my mom signed us up, and instead of going straight home, we went down the street. It was like 2 blocks from my house, St. James Episcopal Church. And lo and behold, who was the teacher? but the lady that turned out to be my piano teacher. And she kind of inspired a lot of stuff. She said something that Anne had said that kind of stuck in my head. In the Bible, you will find everything from love, hate, murder, romance. And I'm thinking, is this the same book? you know, and I just, you just have to read it to see all this stuff. So, that was my first kind of introduction to the church kind of world outside of going to church myself. When I was a kid, young, my dad used to take us to Sunday school, but I never saw him in church really. But at that time, what I realized later in life was that at that time, Sunday school, everybody went at the same time. There wasn't Sunday school during church. So I would stand outside with Mrs. Nobles waiting for my dad to come and pick us up. I thought he was coming from home. And then I kind of thought, well, maybe he was in Sunday school because he knew all our Bible stories. So who knows? I just knew he knew them, and he could help us with, if we had a Sunday school lesson, he'd help us with our homework. So that was kind of fun. My mother grew up in the Methodist church, which is similar, but she always went to, they didn't call it BYF, it was something else. So she was familiar with the Baptist church. What I didn't know, next door, my neighbor, Mr. Shepherd, belonged to 12th Baptist like I did. And the only reason I found that out was because they were trying to find out where all these people were. And I said to my aunt, Mr. Shepherd belonged to 12th Baptist. Yeah, you don't know what happens to people. His wife belonged to St. Augustine's, which was an Episcopal church. So on Saturdays, because I was the only girl and Mr. Shepherd had 3 daughters at the time, I could go to brownies with his daughters. So we would walk down to St. Augustine's, and there was a blacksmith shop. That's what this represents. I'm telling you, Boston was behind the times. But anyway, we passed the blacksmith shop, and you could kind of stand there, and he was actually working on horseshoes. So we went to see Mr. Shepherd's mother, and we went to brownies. Oh, I don't even know where to go after that, because when I think about it, it brings back a lot of good memories. I ended up going to the Episcopal camp because Breezy Meadows had a fire, and I don't know how long ago it was before I was at camp age. But my mom was very protective. So you've got 3 girls going, you're going with them. So I went to Lincoln Hill Camp. Wonderful experience, loved the place. And my mother would put us on the train, and we'd go down. It wasn't that far when I think about it now. It was in Foxborough, Mass. Every single day we had chapel. I could almost do some of the Apostle Creed now, because that's what we learned. We did it every day. The first time I went, I think I went for a month, and then they made people come and get their kids, because folks would just, leave their kids. My brothers went to a Salvation Army camp, because my father worked for somebody that was on one of the boards, and he was able to get him in. So my parents' vacation was when we were gone. They had a couple of weeks when they could actually be grown-ups. So, but like I said, I loved camp. I just loved it. I learned archery. I learned, we had riflery. We had tennis. I really liked tennis. And I actually played tennis all the way through college. So, not that I was Venus or Serena, no way. But it was fun. It was fun. When I got out of 6th grade, the high school I went to started in 7th grade. I went to Girls Latin. It was an experience. It was a good place in a way. I didn't survive there. One of the things that happened, I had algebra. I can't even tell you. I didn't do well. This was 8th grade. I did not do well in algebra, so I took it again in summer school. So when I transferred to the school down the street, another girls' high school, I said to Mrs. Victoriano, "Oh, I got my math credits during summer school." She said, "Well, we don't have any record of it." So I took algebra for the third time. Oh, I'm telling you, I'm still not sure how algebra works, but anyway, I did it, and the next year I had geometry. Didn't care for that either. And then they put me in trig, and I just don't get it. I'm sorry, I'm not a math person. So I survived high school. During that time, and that's why I have this doll, the civil rights movement was stepping up. You watch the TV and you see these poor kids and adults get hit with fire hoses and dogs, and it was scary. So this doll represents that time. She's an American Girl doll. I just got her about 2 months ago. A friend of mine, actually one of my old roommates, has a relationship with American Girl, and she gave me that doll. Anyway, we managed to get through that. Our church, 12th Baptist, was pretty active. I know Mike Haynes was friends to Dr. King, and they did the March on Washington, and there was a bus going from our church, and I begged my mother if I could go. She said no. And I was about 14 years old, and no, she wasn't gonna let me go, not unless she could go or one of my aunts could go. And I can understand that now. It's not a place you want to send your kid by themselves. So I went, I moped around, and we survived it. And I actually ended up working at Woolworth, which was one of the main culprits in the South for not letting blacks eat at the counter. And when I worked there, I worked with two of my fun friends, Sophie Theodore. Her father was the vegetable and fruit man, and Bruce Coker. Now, during the time I went to school, it was very integrated. We were all World War II, Korean War kids. You lived where you could afford. There was none of this. At that time, there were a lot of white kids in my class. It was just a mixed group. It wasn't just, they called it de facto segregation later on, but not when I was a kid. So anyway, we lived through that, and as I said, I got the job at Woolworths. I never thought I'd work there, but I did. And actually, it helped pay for my college. So when I went to college, that was, well, let me go back a little bit. High school was kind of, as I said, geometry. Ugh. I got through it. My mom actually helped me. She was pretty good at deciphering the problems. And, my dad would say, "Go ask your mother." So she helped. But I got through that, and let me see. Let me check something first before I say something else. Okay. When it was time to go to college, I applied to several places. One was Northeastern University. One was Boston State. One school I didn't even know it was an all-male school, because I kept getting mail with just Gerald Saunders on it. I'm like, what is this? So Northeastern was okay, except when I talked to the financial aid office and realized tuition was $5,000. There's no way I could afford it. So I went to Boston State. Now, Northeastern, Boston State, and Wentworth was a college area, and I could walk to school. Northeastern was $5,000. Boston State was $200,000. Big difference. By this time, my mother's eyesight was gone. She was losing her eyesight. So she was okay by the time I graduated high school, but by the time I graduated college, my first year, she ended up going to Catholic School for the Blind, which was a residential school. So I went to Boston State. My youngest brother, Stephen, and I would walk I would go off through the projects to Boston State. My brother would go off to Boston Trade. So when I was there, I go to class and people would say, "Oh, you live in the projects." No, I don't live in the projects. I just cut through there. And they were horrified. Why would you do that? They thought I lived there, no problem. I never had a problem. Other people might have, but I didn't. So anyway, I worked at Woolworths, paid my own tuition, bought books, and that first year was difficult. My mother was away at school. My first year of college was interesting. Boston State made you take phys ed. So, okay, that was fine, except I signed up for archery. This is what I got. I do not know how archery and golf even are close. The other thing I got, was square dancing. Now, square dancing, believe it or not, when I came to Denver and they had, in January, they have the rodeo and all that stuff, I used to teach my kids square dancing. The gym teacher wouldn't do it. He just, well, one of the gym teachers wouldn't do it, but I did. And it's funny to watch fourth graders not want to touch each other when you're doing an Alaman or star in the middle, you don't want to touch. But we made it. I even taught my first graders. So I don't remember all the steps, but it was interesting. I got to the end of my senior year, and I thought I was done. I get a call from the dean. I'm thinking, now what did I fail and I didn't know? Well, it wasn't that I failed. I had to have swimming. Boston State did not have a swimming pool. So we had to go downtown to the Y, go take our swimming class. If you could pass the test, fine. I couldn't pass the test and I knew it. Even at camp, I had a difficult time. So I missed the June graduation. But I was able to sign up for the August graduation, which was perfect. We had it in the quadrangle of the school, which was very small. My mother could hear everything. She couldn't see anything, but it was perfect. My aunt and my dad brought her. It was wonderful. We made it. I just don't know how we did it. I taught at, after graduation, I got a call from one of the principals, and it kind of freaked me out because her name was Frances Kelly, which was also the name of my aunt. And I was like, oh, okay. So Miss Kelly called and asked if I wanted to teach at the Lee School. Well, this was kind of the beginning of the busing stuff in Boston. It was rough because the Lee School was brand new, state-of-the-art, swimming pool, beautiful gym, the whole 9 yards. But it was across the street from the Franklin Field projects. Those kids the line was drawn so that those kids from Franklin Field projects did not attend the Lee School. That caused a big problem. Parents were out there with signs. It was scary, kind of. So anyway, they kind of redid the lines, and a lot of the kids from the projects got to come to the school. We didn't even have a gym teacher that first year, but they said if you wanted to do gym, you had training from college on phys ed. So I took my kids to the gym, had Michael Hunter, never forget him. We were doing relay race, and he took his shoes off. Well, instead of tagging the person, he tagged the wall and broke his arm. He had a compound fracture. I had to put a book under his arm, and we walked him back to the office. And guess what? He was back the next day. And it's always when you're little rascals that they're never sick, but he came back the next day and he was just fine. Then busing really took off in Boston. So I got transferred to the Russell School, one of my roommates got transferred to the Gavin School in South Boston. That was the center of a lot of stuff. And then my other roommate just went across the street. She was at Highland Park Free School. And I say that to say that when I came to Denver, they have orientation for the teachers. And I was sitting in a room when this lady comes over and she's talking to me about joining the union and all that. And she said, well, my son is a principal in Boston. And I'm like, oh, okay, what's his name? Oh, Philip Hart. And I'm thinking, there are not that many Black principals. And I thought, okay, did they call him Felipe Corazon? I said, he's the principal across the street at Highland Park Free School. Sure enough, that's how small the world is. Anyway, I survived the Russell School. Adrian survived the Gavin. She was a music teacher. She played the flute. My friend Jerry Robinson, who was at the Highland Park Free School, became the vice president of the Children's Museum in Boston. That's how I ended up with some of these dolls. And I just continued on. One of the teachers that I worked with, her husband drove truck and introduced me to my husband. So we got married, and he didn't like the East Coast. If you're driving an 18-wheeler, I can understand why. It's very narrow, and you've got to back your truck up into spaces that are very difficult. So he asked me if I would like to meet his mom. So I came out, met his mom, and he took me up to the mountains, and I'm up there and I'm looking back. It was beautiful, but there's this brown thing. I said, what is that? Oh, that's the brown cloud. So that was kind of, disappointing. I met did I meet Joanne? He had 3 daughters, and they were older. They weren't babies. And I can remember after we got married, Bill said to me, how many kids do you want? And I told him 10. If he were living now, he would say, just like mother, just like mother. And I was just, because he came from a family, I think they originally had 12. And his, there were some that didn't make it. So anyway, I only had William, and that was a blessing. And he's so rotten now. He's just spoiled. The one thing about living in Colorado that amazes me is that you can drive for a couple of hours and you're still in the state. When you live in Massachusetts, you drive and you're in Maine or you're in New Hampshire, Rhode Island. We saw all the states. And then I get here, I said, well, William, we're going to go on a picnic to different places. I'm telling you, I drove and I drove. I think I made it to Colorado Springs. That's about an hour. But then, later on, I took him down to Four Corners, and we did Mesa Verde. We did Canyon City. What's the other one? Glenwood Springs. I love Glenwood Springs. We did it on the train, so, we got to see that. But it's just, very different than back east. So anyway, time is getting close. So I want to talk about some of the things on the table. Down at that end, I have my Bible from high school. When we graduated, our minister gave all the seniors a Bible. Now the Bible it's Revised Standard. William went to camp and they said, bring your Bible. So I wasn't giving him my high school Bible because it's all falling apart. And I gave him, I said, well, what do they do? He's middle school age. I gave him the Serendipity Bible. And some of you probably know what that is. It's easy read to me. But he gets there and he said, Mom, it doesn't even say the same thing. So I said, William, there's so many different versions of the Bible. I gave you the easiest read, that you could have. So he made it through camp. That's a picture of my brother he passed away. when I taught school, one of the things that we did, we took the kids to Washington, D.C. This is a picture of us. I don't know if Ted Kennedy came out, but he took a picture with us. So that's a picture of us, all the kids. It was a good trip. I didn't get to see much. One of my kids got sick. I got to see the hospital. There were two hospitals. One was GW, which I assume was George Washington Hospital. They did not have an ear. He had something in his ear, and I guess the pressure of the plane loosened it, so he was in tears the whole time. So I said, okay, we'll get you to the hospital. We get to GW, and they said, we don't have an ear, nose, and throat guy on, but go to Freedman's Hospital. Well, the history of Freedman's Hospital goes back to when the slaves were freed. And I'm trying to think, I think it's the Morehouse or Howard University Hospital now. So when I was there in Washington, D.C. about 2 years ago, my roommate at the convention got sick, and they took us there. So I said to the nurse, I said, have you ever heard of Freedman's Hospital? One nurse said, no, never heard of it. So when another nurse came by, I asked her, and she said, you're in it. And I thought, how you kind of recognize neighborhoods or whatever. And she said the university now is in charge of the hospital. This time when I was in DC, I actually went on a tour without kids. But it was nice. The kids got to meet their senator. We had lunch in the Senate office building, and we rode the train that goes between the buildings. We didn't get to see the president. That was the time of Watergate. So, yes. When we were coming into the city, the bus driver said, and this is the Watergate Hotel. And all the teachers went like this, trying to see it, and the kids were like, what are they looking at? So anyway, that was my elementary school teaching. Now, one of the things that I love about Denver, we have rec centers, and the rec centers have a lot of activities. The rec center that was near me growing up they had an ice skating rink and lots of, muscle-bound stuff that I wasn't interested in. So there was a school called the Elma Lewis School of Fine Arts. She was determined to have kids in our neighborhoods have music and art and all kinds of things that you might not get. So I signed up and I took costuming, which is a big name. It was tough. It was not an easy class. We learned how to make our own patterns. Gus and Lucy were the teachers, the main teachers, but they had people to come in and teach us how to, measure our bodies and do that kind of stuff. One lady was going to teach, if we stayed with the class, she was going to bring a furrier in so you learn how to work with fur and stuff like that. Gus taught tailoring. My brother wanted me to make him I didn't finish it, I started it. What else did they have? Oh, music lessons. Now, music lessons, you might as well have been in college, because if you took guitar, if you took whatever your instrument, you had to take theory, you had to take sight singing. It wasn't just go in and take your lessons and go home. No, you had to do all the rest of it. So that's the representation of that. And then that's it about Boston. But coming back here, when I came to Calvary, I have to thank two people. Janine was on a gathering Sunday. Well, I had come before that, and my son had been over here before that. But Janine had a table with sewing on it. And it had international sewing. I met Curious there too. And I said, well, I'm not international. Oh, come on, just come on. So I started coming to the sewing group. And then I heard about the quilting group. That was Robin, Cindy, all the ladies, Vonda. It was fun. I had taken a class down the street at the American Quilter or something. And the lady Jane showed us her granddaughter stuff. She was 6. Ugh, put me to shame. But so that's how I got to do quilting. I think Cindy was the one that sent out the email about the strips. That's how I got this. So it's not finished. It has some work to go. But there's a nursing home not far from the rec center that I go to, and they had 52 patients. Well, I just took some that I had, and I guess they think I'm going to make 52, but I don't think so. I'm trying to get the other ladies that are in my other sewing group to do that. The other project we had, and I know I'm skipping around because our time is short, we had little dresses for Africa, so. And I called Anne to find out some more information. But this is one of the dresses. It needs, but it's real super simple. And this is the one, you're supposed to make them out of about a yard of cloth or pillowcases. So this is another one. We sent, I think we sent 89 or 90 dresses. They're super simple to make, and they don't go, even though it's called Little Dresses for Africa, they don't always go to Africa. They go to Haiti, they go to, I don't know, just any place that needs it. Guatemala was another country. There are some organizations that don't want the pillowcase dresses, but they will take, regular jumper dresses like this. So that's what I've been doing for the past almost 70 years. So little things like that, it's been a real growth experience, going from small town kind of Boston in my area all the way to Colorado. So that's it. Any questions? And I know I skipped around, I'm sorry. Okay, Ken? Oh, okay. When I came here, I did have an accent. There was a kid, and he's now a big-time lawyer. Tag Hansen used to say, "Park the car in Harvard Yard," and I'm like, "What?" First I didn't know what he was talking about. When I came to Calvary, I heard this man talking. I wonder who it was. I said, "Who's the man from Boston?" And finally, I met Walter. But I don't hear it as much in Edith. Sometimes I do. And I sometimes hear it in Kim. But I kind of I've lost it. But if I'm home for 2 weeks, it comes back. So I had a chuckle, and I'm sorry. But there was a man from Worcester, Mass here, and you introduced him, and you were kind of messing up the Worcester. I looked at Walter. It was all I could do not to laugh out loud, because the two of us were kind of smiling, and I said, this is going to be embarrassing. I cannot laugh out loud. So yeah, Boston is very distinct. Maine is even more distinct. If you know somebody from Maine, it's like American Gothic. Maine is worse. I know some folks that went up to Maine and they couldn't hardly wait to get out of there. So, but yeah, I've had quite the journey. I worked at Park Hill United Methodist Church at their daycare in the summertime. I worked at St. Cyprian's Episcopal Church day camp growing up. I really wanted to work at Lincoln Hill, but it's like who answers your letter first. So I worked at St. Cyprian's. So a lot of experience with the Episcopal Church and some with the Methodist Church, even though sometimes they say they're not affiliated, they are. Believe me, they are. So I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it a lot. So that's it. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. One of the things about Boston that I love that I can't get here is fish. Yes, we have catfish, but I grew up on haddock because my uncle was a diesel mechanic. He worked on the ships. We had lobster, and lobster now is I don't know how people afford it, but we would he'd bring a basket of lobster, and give it to us. But not so much crab, but I know we had a lot of lobster. And there was one thing my father had that I don't think anybody else would eat. It was a dried cod, and you chopped it up with a little bit of salt pork, potatoes, onions, and that would be dinner. I know it sounds kind of gross, but we ate it and we loved it. So, but if you grow up on the other thing is, and Rory was asking me about traveling. When you live on the East Coast, it's easy to get to Europe. It's an overnight flight. You're there. So we did a lot of traveling. It's not anything. And one lady said to me, "Oh, you just go on cruises." Well, yeah, I did cruises, but I also traveled. One of my first trips was to Spain, Morocco, and one of my roommates was supposed to go, and somehow lines got crossed and she didn't go. Well, my father was like, "Why do you want to go to Morocco?" I mean, he was adamant. Well, I ended up going by myself, and he still doesn't know that today. I just went. I was with a group. I stayed with the group. It was wonderful. Spain in the southern part, I saw the Alhambra, the whole thing. When I went over to Morocco, you just take a ferry. It's Tangiers is just right over. Yeah, it's not a big deal. It was like stepping back into Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. It was beautiful, but different, very different to be so close to Spain. Another time, the three of us went to Senegal. That was very different. This one lady kept saying, "Oh, I'm afraid of the tigers." Finally, I said to her, "You might find a lion, but not a tiger." So it was interesting when we got off the plane to come home. We're so used to turning on the faucet, getting what I would call clean water, and there was a line at the water fountain at Logan Airport to get a sip of water without having bottled water. I mean, we take so much for granted that, it's really good to travel. My mother encouraged us to do that. So, I've done that. I just got back from London. That was probably the most expensive trip I've done. Because when I went before, my Canadian friends and I went, and we just got a bed and breakfast, and we stayed a month. And we just used public transportation. Everything's in English, so no big deal. We went over to Paris, no big deal there. You just get on the ferry and go. And now everything has cameras here, cameras there. You go to the theater, they want to check your bag. So the fun has kind of gone out of it. I don't know. I want to go back, but this time I'm not going with a tour group. I think we'll just go back as a bunch of friends and we'll take public transportation. But it was very different this last time. So that's me, and time is up.
You kept saying those little aprons are easy to make, but not if you don't know how to sew. So don't sell yourself short. Oh, holy and gracious God, we are so grateful for your beloved daughter, Geraldine. God, as she was speaking, I was thinking of the image of a quilt and how our lives are really like quilt squares stitched together. So many different experiences, taking us in paths and directions we don't anticipate or know about, sometimes wondering how we got to point B from point A. And yet, as we look back over the years, what a beautiful tapestry and quilt it is. I thank you for the quilt of Geraldine's life, all of the people and experiences who have shaped her and formed her into the woman she is today. I marvel at her memory and her ability to remember their names, first names and last names, and the little details of the stories and the impact they had on her life. We thank you for each of those people, and we thank you for all the students that Geraldine influenced through her teaching, for all the friends she has influenced here at Calvary and other churches along the way. May all of our spirits be open to curiosity and discovery like Geraldine. May we be willing to face the obstacles in life, things like algebra and trigonometry, and may we revel in the blessings of life as well. Continue to give good health to Geraldine and her family and friends, and carry us all through, O God, as we continue to share our stories and grow in love of you and one another. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.